I don't know about you, but I'm a fan of big tanks. And I don't think there's a single franchise on Earth that wouldn't have at least been made a lot more interesting with a couple of Bane Blades thrown in the mix. And the tanks in Warhammer 40k are some of the coolest I've ever seen. They've got tanks that can fly, tanks the size of freaking houses, and in case you forgot what franchise this is, tanks with missile launchers in the shape of ornate pipe organs. But what makes a tank the best tank? Is it simply how powerful they are, their durability, practicality, or is it just the coolness factor? Well, today we're gonna get to the bottom of that as I've created a list of my picks for the top 8 best tanks in 40k. But before we dive into that, did you know Warhammer 40k is coming to World of Tanks? And they're this week's sponsor. So a quick shout out to them, and then we're gonna dive headfirst into the grimdark. Stay tuned. The grimdarkness of the Warhammer 40k universe has come to World of Tanks with their latest battle pass. And if you're not familiar with it, World of Tanks is a free-to-play, massively multiplayer online wargame featuring an absolutely massive amount of tanks, with 5 different unique classes to choose from, including light, medium, and heavy tanks, as well as tank destroyers and even artillery. In the 40k themed battle pass, a new STC or standard template construct has been located. Lieutenant Thassaeus of the Ultramarines, Dolgoth Sept, champion of the Death Guard, and Warboss Kroglin the Facegrinder of the Evil Sons clan now find themselves locked in an eternal struggle to gain control of the ancient relic. And for good reason, as STCs contain the blueprints for some of the most powerful technology the galaxy has ever seen. The events of the Battle Pass see players selecting one of these 3 chapters, and then earn a ton of unique rewards by playing in random games. Each chapter has a unique 40k 3D style associated with it, including an Ultramarine style for the E100, an Ork style for the STB-1, and the corrupted stylings of the Death Guard for the Object 430U. And in my free time, I've been playing a whole lot of World of Tanks. I love how much weight is behind each of these vehicles. It really feels like I'm in control of a massive armored juggernaut. But by my own admission, I'm a filthy casual. I learned the hard way that charging ahead of my team into the middle of an open field was a quick way to end up dead.
We've lost some ammo, but at least it didn't explode.
But once I started to get the hang of flanking, utilizing bushes and cliffs for cover, and taking well-placed shots rather than just firing blindly, I racked up quite a few kills. I found the game to be quite immersive and challenging, and ultimately really enjoyable. If you're a big fan of tanks or just appreciate well-designed battle games, then now has never been a better time to start playing World of Tanks. If you're a new player, click on the link in the description of this video and use the code TANKMANIA when you register an account. You'll instantly unlock your own Tier 5 tank, the Excelsior, 250k credits, 7 days of premium access, and 3 Tier 6 rental tanks for 10 battles each. That's gonna give you a big head start on the competition. Thanks again to the awesome people over at World of Tanks for sponsoring this video, and let's get into the grimdark. In at number 8, we have the Rhino. The humble Rhino is one of the most widely used and trusted of all Space Marine ground transports. Its origins can be traced back to the days of the Great Crusade, when the legions of Space Marines were sent out to reunite all of humanity under one banner. Or more accurately, sent out to conquer the galaxy. It was the perfect balance of armor and speed that could quickly deliver a payload of Marines to and from important tactical positions. Like with most of the Imperium's vehicles, the Rhinos were also utilized by the forces of chaos as well. However, millennia of mutating exposure to the warp has caused some of them to gain a demonic sentience, and there are reports of Rhinos within the forces of the traitor legions literally eating the Space Marines they are tasked with ferrying into battle. What makes the Rhino so special is its unmatched versatility, not to mention its pretty straightforward design that makes its repairs and productions pretty easy in comparison to some of the other marvels of engineering employed by the forces of mankind. It's also incredibly adaptable. The Rhino chassis actually serves as pretty much a blank canvas for a wide array of variations, many of which have become so widely used that they are often mistaken as completely unique vehicles. These include things like the Predators, Whirlwinds, Vindicators, and the Exorcist, just to name a few. The Predator variant replaces its transport capacity in exchange for more powerful generators, ammunition, and multiple auto or las cannons, transforming the Rhino from something primarily designed to protect life to an engine of death designed to take it. The Whirlwind deviates from the original designs by mounting a Whirlwind missile launcher on top of the tank. This gives the vehicle the ability to deliver a powerful salvo of missiles from an exceptionally long range away to strike at enemy forces behind cover. Whereas the Vindicator variant has a forward-mounted demolisher cannon, framed by what is known as a siege shield. This offers much more forward-facing protection, and the Vindicator serves as a mobile wrecking ball that can topple enemy fortifications with relative ease. Now, although it's most commonly associated with the Space Marines, the Rhino has actually been used by a wide array of factions within the Imperium, including the Inquisition, Adeptus Custodes, and the Adeptus Sororitas. who, in my opinion, have created the coolest, most 40k version of the Rhino known as the Exorcist, or as some people prefer to call it,
the piano tank.
The Exorcist utilizes a long-range melt-to-missile system similar to that of the Whirlwind, but in the shape of ornate pipe organs, often being deployed in a formation of dozens of such tanks known as a chorus of faith. An Exorcist squadron can melt even titans under a torrential downpour of missiles, the Sisters' judgment raining down upon the enemy as if from heaven itself. In number 7, we have the Ork Tanks, and I mean all of them. There's a lot of amazing things to love in the 40k universe, but nothing quite does it for me quite like Ork engineering. Ork tanks are much like the orcs themselves. Brutish, crude, cheap, and above all else, incredibly effective. Unlike with other species that have a vast classification system for just about every nut and bolt used in their construction, leading to multiple dozens of different variants of the same tank, all with different names, histories, and purposes. This isn't really how the orcs operate. The Imperium has classified a few different variants, such as battle wagons, looted wagons, or kill cruises, mostly centered around a classification of what the vehicles are used for. But you won't find a long storied history or catalog of production notes on any orc vehicles. All of their tanks are created by what are known as mech boys, orcish engineers that seem more like mad scientists than anything else. They're responsible for making and upkeeping all of the equipment the orcs use, and are seemingly limited only by their crazy imagination and what they can come up with. For gaming purposes, there are many different named vehicles, such as battle wagons, kill cruises, looted wagons, trucks, etc. But at the end of the day, as far as the orcs are concerned, tanks are tanks, bikes are bikes, and that's about the extent of it, no matter how big or killy they are. Considering that their tanks are basically a pile of trash glued together vaguely in the shape of a tank, brought to life by the power of imagination, the orc tanks are incredibly easy to produce, and thus the orcs can develop massive amounts of them. Compare this to the war engines of the Imperium, many of which are no longer able to be made, and the ones that can be produced take an incredibly long time to manufacture. So much so that they literally venerate them and see them as holy relics. This is the exact opposite of how orcs look at their vehicles. They're cheap and ugly, but they get the job done. Now, if you're a player of the 40k tabletop game, when you think of an orc tank, you probably think of the battle wagon. And although there's a standard model for it in the game, in the books, the battle wagon can take millions of different forms, every single one of them being completely unique, as they were made out of whatever material the mech boy could get his hands on, and whatever war boss commissioned it from him probably had his own unique tastes. Battle wagons are traditionally large vehicles covered in armor, designed to transport orcs into combat. There's nothing the greenskins like more than quote-unquote getting stuck in a fight, and anything that gets them faster is worth having on the battlefield. Most of these vehicles have some kind of internal chamber for the orcs to be in, while other times, a battle wagon can just have dozens of orcs hanging off of the side from a bunch of crudely slapped on handholds. Fun fact, in the 40k tabletop game, vehicles that can carry troops normally have a maximum capacity. Tiny vehicles can carry around 5 models, while larger ones can carry between 10 and 20, with larger models taking up more spots. The battle wagon, way back in the day, used to have a unique special rule where it could carry as many orcs as you could physically stack on top of it. So this would lead orc players to Jengaing together a massive tower of orcs standing 1.5 feet in the air, careening forward into the enemy. And trying to think of what that would actually look like from the Space Marines' perspective that are trying to fight the orcs brings me endless amounts of joy. And here's the most important thing about orc tanks. They're definitely ugly and shoddily built, and they may be missing some of the more intricate refinements of the Imperium's vehicles. But the one thing they're not lacking is firepower. Any weapon that you can think of, the orcs have some kind of variation that they include on their vehicles. This can take the form of cannons, kill cannons, def guns, zappas, and lobbas. And they're not just limited to ranged attacks either. It's very common to see them equipped with melee armaments as well, such as a grabbin' claw or wrecking balls. Their overarching design philosophy is to make their vehicles as killy as possible. And the orcs' logic on this actually kinda makes a lot of sense the more I think about it. 1 gun is good, 2 guns is even better. And if 2 guns is good, then hundreds of guns is best. And if hundreds of guns is best, then why not also give the tank chainsaw arms? Or a giant spiked death roller on the front of the vehicle? It's almost like what a 5-year-old would invent if you told them to use their imagination and design the most dangerous tank ever built. And I don't mean that as an insult to the orcs, because as anyone with a 5-year-old will tell you, they are dangerous. And a lot of the time, the orc tanks don't even start off as their own creations. It's very common for them to steal tanks from other species, or loot them after a battle. They take them back to the mech boys who repair them, and then quote-unquote make them even better by adding more orc stuff to them. This can include replacing the weapons or gluing on copious amounts of armor paneling, or most commonly, loading them up with as much DACA as possible. And it's not that the orcs don't appreciate human weapons, but why use the built-in Lemun Russ's Demolisher cannon when you can replace it with an orc boom cannon? It makes a louder noise, so thus it's better. And the more I think about it, the harder it is for me to find a fault in their logic. It all just makes so much sense. More guns is better, and the more orc stuff glued onto it, the even betterer it is. Okay, I'm definitely showing my bias here, but the orcs just make me so friggin' happy. Anybody that says they don't like the orcs is either lying or they hate fun. In 6th place, we have the Tau HammerHead. Named after the ancient Terran species of shark that shares a similar appearance with it, the HammerHead gunship is the main tank utilized by the Tau Empire. Regardless of how you feel about the Tau, the HammerHead is a tank that absolutely demands respect for its sheer unrelenting destructive capability. Now, the Tau are renowned for specializing in range warfare, striking the opponent hard and fast, and crippling anything that would pose a significant threat to the hunter cadre. The HammerHead fills this role perfectly, as it is able to engage and destroy most vehicles in a single shot from a considerable distance away. Like many of the vehicles on this list, the HammerHead can be equipped with different weapon loadouts and battle systems to assist in a wide array of different battlefield roles. However, most commonly, it's used as a tank killer, as its most iconic weapon is the railgun. The railgun uses linear-induced electromagnetic acceleration to propel a long metal rod incredibly quickly, far faster than the more traditional battle cannons of many Imperial tanks. The rod's impact is strong enough to topple buildings and punch holes right through tanks. But what makes it truly scary is that since the rod is moving at such ludicrous velocities, most estimates putting it well above Mach 10, that shortly after impact, there's a massive burst of pressure followed by an immediate and violent decompression that liquefies everything in the immediate vicinity. There are very few tanks in the 40k universe that can survive a direct hit from the railgun, and if by some miracle the vehicle was able to remain functional after impact, the crew on the inside would not be as lucky, as every piece of organic matter would have been absolutely pulped by a combination of the violent decompression and the whirlwind of shrapnel inside. It's said that the HammerHead is particularly hated by Space Marines, as all of their advanced armor on themselves and their vehicles is completely worthless against it. Their tanks might as well be made out of construction paper. And due to the incredibly advanced grav chutes that the HammerHead utilizes, the vehicle is able to hover, meaning it can go over any terrain without hindrance. The HammerHead is also incredibly agile and is able to reposition to take a better shot with relative ease. When it comes to the HammerHead's armor, it's said to be made out of a nanocrystal alloy, the nature of which isn't quite understood by the Imperium. It's lightweight and corrosive resistant and adds a considerable amount of protection to the tank. However, it's not the strongest armor in the universe, and thus the HammerHead is still vulnerable to the anti-armor weapons of the Imperium. The combination of the HammerHead's speed, its ability to move over any terrain at will, and its absolutely insane range, means that it can afford to not have as much protection, as any enemy tanks that would dare challenge it will be destroyed long before they even know the HammerHead is there. Coming in 5th place is the Necron Doomsday Ark. During the days of the War in Heaven, the Necrons were the most powerful species that had ever existed. They cast off their frail and mortal forms for undying metal bodies, and subsequently turned against the gods they once worshipped, shackling and shattering them and converting their limitless energy into world-ending weaponry. The Doomsday Ark is a perfect example of the ingenuity of Necron engineering. Resembling the ribcage of a giant mechanical monster, the Doomsday Ark essentially is nothing more than a hovering platform for its massive weapon known simply as a Doomsday Cannon. The weapon is said to be so powerful that it can win battles in a single shot, and is capable of unleashing a devastating salvo if that one shot was not enough to placate the Necron Overlord's bloodthirst. The cannon has the unique ability to either disperse or focus its energy. When fired at its maximum potential, it burns with the heat of raging suns and obliterates everything caught within its beam. The void shields of Titans are said to be one of the only practical defenses against this ridiculous cannon, as standard issue armored plating of the Imperium's vehicles offers little to no protection. For a flying vehicle, the Doomsday Ark is said to be pretty slow and ponderous in its movement, and relies on its ridiculous range and superior targeting systems to keep it alive. It does this by destroying any threat long before it could potentially harm the tank. Despite the fact that it moves around pretty slow, if the enemy was to outflank it, it can spin on a dime and unleash its cannon's wrath on any that would dare attempt to sneak up on it. Each of the Doomsday Arks is also equipped with an array of gauze flares, rapid-fire rifles that strip their targets down at a molecular level, meaning that the Doomsday Ark can be an effective weapons platform at pretty much any range. And if you're ever unlucky enough to see one on the battlefield, that pretty much means you've already lost. But from the Necron's point of view, in your final moments before annihilation, you should take solace in the fact that you, a member of a primitive species, was able to witness the Necron's greatness. There's a quote from a Necron cryptech about the Doomsday Arks in the 8th edition Necron Codex that I think is actually pretty interesting.
There is simple pleasure to be found in watching the enemy's crude war machines desperately attempting to evade the killing beam of a doomsday cannon, knowing that their efforts are ultimately futile, and they have but mere moments to live.
All that being said, I bet you'd expect in the tabletop game for Warhammer 40k that the Doomsday Cannon is probably the most powerful weapon ever created, right? Wrong. D6 damage. Fix this, Games Workshop. Coming in at number 4 is the Land Raider. With the exception of possibly the Astartes themselves and the Dreadnoughts, there is potentially nothing quite as iconic as the Land Raider. It's a massive, boxy vehicle that is completely unapologetic in its function and design. It is a perfect hybrid of defensive and offensive capabilities. It features a wide array of different weapon systems, and its hull is crafted from a mixture of ceramite and adamantium, the former being a heat and shock resistant ceramic material used most commonly in the construction of Astartes power armor, while the latter is a form of metal thought to be the strongest known to mankind, most well known for being what Custodes armor is made from. The combination makes the Land Raider all but completely impervious to damage. The Land Raider combines incredible firepower with a transport capacity of double that of its smaller cousin, the Rhino. So not only is it able to ferry troops into battle, but through a combination of heavy bolters and las cannons in its standard issue design, is fully capable of acting as a main battle tank in its own right, tearing apart hordes of infantry and leaving smoking craters in heavily armored opponents. Although less common, Land Raiders are also known to equip hunter-killer missile racks, storm bolters, or even multi-meltas. And the Land Raider can trace its origin back over 10,000 years, before even the founding of the Imperium. But it wouldn't become quite as widespread and iconic until the Emperor deployed it with his Space Marine legions and sent them out during the Great Crusade. The Land Raider was such an unbelievably valuable asset to the legions that an entire Forge World was dedicated solely to their production. Thousands of years later, in the 41st millennium, the Land Raider is still able to be produced, unlike most of the other lost relics of mankind. However, there are few Forge Worlds still capable of manufacturing them, and thus they still remain something of a rarity. Land Raiders are said to have particularly powerful machine spirits, and there are many documented accounts of the Land Raider continuing to move forward and fight, even if its entire crew has been killed. When it comes to the traitor legions that utilize Land Raiders, it is said that the majority of them had their machine spirits tortured and destroyed, subsequently being replaced with the bound spirit of a demon. This is a process utilized in creating what are known as demon engines. So, like them, the Land Raider is basically alive, as its metal hull has become the new body of the trapped demon. In third place, we have the Eldar Falcon. The Falcon is the main and potentially most common tank utilized by the Eldari. Being an ancient race that has full mastery over anti-gravitation propulsion systems, all of the tanks that the species utilize have anti-grav generators. To say the Eldar are super pretentious is a massive understatement. They look at the tanks of the Imperium that utilize tracks as barbaric, primitive, uncouth, and honestly, to be expected from such an unsophisticated species as the Monkey. And although I'm sure the tank battalions of the Astra Militarum definitely would have several choice words for them in the form of a sermon of quake cannons, when it comes to propulsion, they may just have a point. Because of its incredibly advanced anti-grav capabilities, it's estimated that the Falcon has a top speed of 500 miles per hour, making it viciously mobile and deadly. These tanks also have the ability to fly, meaning that they always have the potential for having the elevation advantage, as they can move up into the sky and rain down shots upon the enemy in a swooping dive, like that of the bird it's named after. This flight is limited in scope, and it's not necessarily on par with an actual aircraft, but it does tend to give it an advantage over the tanks of other species. The tank itself is also constructed out of a material that the Eldar call wraithbone. This is the main substance that they use for pretty much all of their weapons, vehicles, and even the continent-sized spaceships that they live on, known as the craft worlds. Wraithbone is basically a condensed crystallized psychic energy pulled directly from the warp that exists as a solid in the physical universe. The Eldar use specially trained individuals known as bone singers, who are skilled in manifesting this material and shaping it into whatever they want. They do this by literally singing it into existence. Lesser Wraithbone creations can be made by pretty much all of the Eldari, such as statues or mundane objects, but truly advanced creations such as the Falcon can only be done by these bone singers. Wraithbone is a miraculous substance that has the ability to repair itself over time. Although under the influence of a bone singer, this process can be dramatically sped up, meaning they play an important role in maintenance and repair even on the battlefield. For large vehicles such as their spaceships, sometimes entire choirs of bone singers work together, using different frequencies of their voice to psychically mold the amorphous raw warp energy into different components molecule by molecule. As is common with other entries on this list, tanks in this universe are incredibly versatile. The Falcon is no exception to this, and it can either function exclusively as a transport unit for Eldari troops, or it can fill an anti-infantry role and be equipped with a combination of scatter lasers and shuriken cannons, or choose to function as a tank hunter and don either Eldari missile launchers or a massive light-based cannon known as a Bright Lance. In second place, we have the Lemun Russ. The Lemun Russ can supposedly trace its origins all the way back to the days of the Dark Age of technology. However, at some point, all of them were destroyed, including all traces of their construction. They would remain unknown to the Imperium until the Space Wolves managed to discover their intact STC. The official lore states that since Lemun Russ had led the crusade that ended up with the retrieval of the tank's STC, that the Mechanicum decided to name it after him. Although out of universe and potentially a little bit meta, I personally think this is a subtle nod to the fact that in the earliest lore, the Primarchs weren't really a thing. Horus was just considered to be a space marine that turned traitor, and the character that we would later know as Lemun Russ was just a commander within the Imperial army. He wasn't even a space marine. None of that is considered canon anymore, but I think the naming might be a slight nod to that. The Lemun Russ is an absolutely brutal tank. It's not particularly fast or elegant, but it makes up for this in sheer crushing power. It moves forward, grinding the enemy down under its oppressive firepower, and treads that will crush anything or anyone that would dare get in the tank's way. They represent exactly what the Astra Militarum does best: a grinding war of attrition, a sheer stubborn defiance, and a refusal to yield. The main weapon of a Lemun Russ is a 120mm smoothbore battle cannon that launches shells capable of decimating enemy infantry and punching through all but the heaviest of armor. The shells that it fires are also loaded with an impact-fused explosive charge that causes its shots to create a massive explosion on impact. The tank does have a weakness though, and that is that its armor plating on its sides is much thinner in comparison to the thick plating on its front. This is to prevent overheating of the Lemun Russ's engine. This can leave the Lemun Russ vulnerable to flanking, and thus they're often deployed in squadrons in order to protect one another. Sometimes, the Astra Militarum will employ an absolutely enormous amount of these tanks, deployed in a multiple mile-long line of sheer Imperial domination. An earth-shaking tide of armor and awe-inspiring firepower that sweeps across the battlefield, turning the enemy army into nothing more than red smears and rubble. If there's one thing that you have to understand about the Lemun Russ, is that it is the quintessential old reliable. It has been in service for thousands of years, thanks to its superior engineering and the good old-fashioned elbow grease of the men and women of the Astra Militarum. It may not be incredibly fast like the Eldar Falcon. It may not have the latest technology like the Tau HammerHead. It may not even have the versatility of the Space Marine Land Raider. But just like a good soldier, it can be relied upon to do its job without failure and without complaint. It's a tank that knows exactly what it is, and it makes no apologies for it. It's crude, ugly, dirty, greasy, and clunky, and the members of the Imperial Guard wouldn't have it any other way. Coming as a surprise to absolutely no one, in first place we have the Bane Blade. The Bane Blade is an armored god of war, an absolute legend amongst the forces of the Astra Militarum, and one of the oldest and most powerful tanks ever created by the Imperium. They are so massive that they require a minimum of 10 crewmen in order to operate. These include a tank commander, tactical officer, driver, primary and secondary gunners, primary and secondary loaders, a tertiary gunner, and a tertiary loader. And not to mention at least one dedicated member of the Mechanicus, who assists in repairs and maintenance, and initiates the mandatory rituals in order to keep the Bane Blade's machine spirit appeased. Now, despite their outward appearance, they're less of a tank and more of a heavily armed fortress on tracks, serving as an ideal command center for the commanders of an Astra Militarum force. Seeing a Bane Blade on your side of the battlefield is an absolutely inspiring moment than even the most courageous of speeches by the esteemed generals of the Astra Militarum. They are absolutely monstrous vehicles designed to stand in defiance against any that would threaten the sanctity of the Emperor's Imperium, and any guardsman that sees one will be more than thankful it's on their side. The Bane Blade can deal with a wide array of different enemy types, as it is covered in heavy bolters designed to shred enemy infantry, while its massive mega battle cannon can obliterate even the most heavily armored enemy combatants, such as other tanks or even enemy titans. Now, just for reference, the mega battle cannon used by the Bane Blade has a barrel around 10 meters in length and fires a shell that's about a meter long. Each of these shells is rocket assisted, meaning that after the shell leaves the barrel of the gun, the rockets can kick in to increase its speed or maintain it over the bullet's distance. This means the Bane Blade can hit targets over a kilometer away, and when the shell makes impact, it's said that it can leave a hole in heavy armor large enough for a full-grown man to walk through. Saying that the Bane Blade is huge, I feel is kind of an understatement. Its main chassis weighs around 316 tons, not including all of its additional armaments. It's around 46 feet long, 28 feet wide, and about 21 feet tall, and that's not including the gun on top of it. So this thing is about as tall as a 2-story building. The very first Bane Blades were produced on Mars, and to this day, the Martian tech priests view the original Mars pattern Bane Blades as the closest iteration to the machine god's will. And the fact that other Forge worlds have deviated from these designs and iterated on them is definitely something that annoys them to no end. Most of these variants are remarkably similar, normally just adopting different weapon systems. These include the Hellhammer, which replaces the Mega Battle Cannon with a Hellhammer cannon, or the Stormhammer, which replaces the same battle cannon with a twin-linked version, a second set of twin-linked battle cannons mounted on the front hull, and an extra set of sponsons. And if that wasn't enough, it also has a multi-laser system that can be replaced with up to 7 las cannons. It can also take heavy bolters, heavy flamers, a hunter-fire missile rack, and a bevy of other loadouts. At the end of the day, a Stormhammer can roll into combat with around 20 different powerful guns, making it the undisputed king of raw firepower within the Imperial Guard, and potentially one of the most dangerous vehicles the Imperium has ever used. And when I was a kid, I was absolutely obsessed with this thing. I love that it was one of the oldest tanks still being used, and that being as it was a product of an STC, there was this whole mysterious background about its origins, that it was supposedly based off of ancient perfect designs, and was thus worshipped by the cult Mechanicus. I thought it was so cool that the most powerful tank that the Imperium could make, one that was supposedly based off of designs from a time of super advanced technology that had since been lost, suspiciously looked incredibly similar to the tanks we utilize in the modern world. I guess things were just built different in the 21st century. Now, during the days of the Great Crusade, it was said there were entire divisions of Bane Blades, and that the Imperium could potentially roll onto the battlefield with hundreds of them. Like with most of the super awesome big stuff in 40k nowadays, millennia of near constant war and the subsequent loss of many irreplaceable knowledge centers has left the number of Bane Blades severely diminished in comparison, meaning when one shows up, it's a much bigger deal. And there we go, those are the 8 coolest tanks in all of 40k. Now, we here in the Warhammer community are some of the most opinionated fans on the internet. So do you agree with my listing? Do you feel like a certain tank should have been ranked higher or lower? Is there a tank that you particularly love that you didn't see make it on the list? Let me know down in the comments why it's so special to you, and why you think it definitely deserved to be on this list. I'll probably make a follow-up video to this sometime in the future because, honest to God, just within the Imperial Guard, I could do a top 100 tanks. If you enjoyed this video and you want to help me make more content like this, I do have a Patreon that's listed down in the video description. Because of all the love and support that you guys have shown me over there, me and my friends were able to invest in a full podcast setup and our own studio space to record it in. Which, by the way, that studio space is attached to a Warhammer store. It's literally a dream come true. That is the coolest fucking thing ever. So needless to say, I am wicked excited about that, and I couldn't have done it without the support from you guys. So honest to God, I can't thank you enough. Until next time, happy wargaming.